In 2009, Jackie Chan sat at a business forum in southern China and said something that would haunt him for years. A reporter asked about freedom and democracy in Chinese society, and Jackie responded, "I'm not sure if it's good to have freedom or not. I'm gradually beginning to feel that we Chinese need to be controlled. If we're not being controlled, we'll just do what we want." The room went silent. Then the statement spread across international media, translated, analyzed, debated. In the West, people were shocked. Jackie Chan, the lovable action star, the symbol of persistence and hard work, was apparently arguing against freedom and for authoritarian control. In mainland China, reactions were mixed. Some praised him for being realistic about Chinese society. Others accused him of being a mouthpiece for the government. And in Hong Kong, where Jackie was born and built his career, the response was overwhelmingly negative. Protests, boycotts, accusations of betrayal. Jackie tried to clarify, saying his comments were taken out of context, mistranslated, misunderstood. But the damage was done. The man who'd spent decades building a reputation as a global entertainer had revealed something uncomfortable. His political views didn't align with the image millions of fans held of him. And the question that's followed him ever since is whether Jackie Chan, the beloved action star, and Jackie Chan, the political figure, can coexist, or whether one inevitably destroys the other. To understand how Jackie arrived at that moment, you need to understand his relationship with mainland China, which is complicated by history, identity, and the specific circumstances of his upbringing. Jackie was born in Hong Kong in 1954, when it was still a British colony, politically and culturally separate from mainland China. His parents were refugees from the Chinese Civil War. His father had fled mainland China after working for the nationalist government, living under a false identity to avoid retribution from the communist authorities. Jackie grew up in a Hong Kong that was economically connected to China, but politically distant, operating under British colonial rule with its own legal system, its own culture, its own identity. For most of Jackie's early life and career, mainland China was essentially closed to the outside world. After the Communist Party took power in 1949, China underwent radical transformations: land reform, collectivization, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution. The country was isolated, poor, struggling with internal political upheavals. Hong Kong, by contrast, was becoming an economic powerhouse, a hub of manufacturing and finance, and by the 1970s, a global center for film production. Jackie's entire career was built in Hong Kong's film industry, making movies for Hong Kong audiences and eventually for international markets, but not for mainland China, which didn't really have a commercial film market during those decades. This started to change in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when China began opening up economically under Deng Xiaoping's reforms. The country started allowing foreign films, started developing its own commercial film industry, started engaging with the outside world economically while maintaining strict political control. Hong Kong films, including Jackie's, began circulating in mainland China, sometimes officially, sometimes through pirated copies. Jackie became known in China not through official channels, but through underground circulation of his films, which young Chinese audiences watched and loved for the same reasons audiences everywhere did: the creativity, the humor, the authentic physicality. By the 1990s, as China's economy grew and its film market expanded, Jackie started making films specifically for mainland audiences and working more directly with Chinese authorities and state-owned film companies. This was a practical business decision. China was becoming the largest film market in Asia, and access to that market meant enormous financial opportunity, but it also required navigation of China's political and censorship systems. Films had to be approved by government censors. Content that criticized the government or presented China negatively would be rejected. Cooperation with Chinese authorities was necessary for commercial success. Jackie navigated this system successfully, making films that were approved for Chinese release, attending events with Chinese government officials, becoming a prominent figure in China's entertainment industry. In 1998, he was appointed as a representative to the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC, an advisory body to the Chinese government. This wasn't a powerful political position, The CPPCC doesn't make laws or have real governing authority, but it was a symbolic role that indicated official favor and required public support for government policies. Jackie accepted the position and has held it ever since, regularly attending CPPCC meetings, making public statements supporting various government initiatives, serving as a cultural ambassador for the Chinese government. This political role created no controversy in mainland China, where successful business people and celebrities routinely take on such advisory positions as a way of signaling loyalty and maintaining good relationships with authorities. But it created immediate tension in Hong Kong, where public sentiment toward the mainland government was much more complicated. Hong Kong was scheduled to be returned to Chinese sovereignty in 1997, ending over 150 years of British colonial rule. Many Hong Kong residents were anxious about this transition, worried about losing the political freedoms and legal protections they'd enjoyed under British rule, concerned about mainland authorities imposing authoritarian control. Jackie's increasing alignment with the mainland government during this period was viewed by many Hong Kong residents as opportunistic at best, treasonous at worst. Here was someone who'd built his entire career in Hong Kong, who'd benefited from Hong Kong's free market and open society, now cozying up to the mainland authorities who many Hong Kong people viewed as a threat to their way of life. The fact that Jackie was doing this for obvious commercial reasons, access to the massive mainland market, didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse, suggesting Jackie was willing to compromise political principles for money. The 2009 comments about Chinese people needing to be controlled were the first major public controversy, but they weren't the last. In 2012, Jackie made comments suggesting that protesters in Hong Kong and Taiwan were being manipulated by foreign forces, implying that calls for democracy and freedom were not genuine local sentiments, but Western interference. In 2013, he made statements about corruption in China that seemed to defend it as a systemic problem rather than criticizing it, saying corruption exists everywhere and shouldn't be viewed as uniquely Chinese. Each of these statements generated backlash, particularly in Hong Kong and Taiwan, where they were seen as Jackie defending authoritarian practices and dismissing legitimate concerns about freedom and human rights. The pattern that emerged was clear. Jackie would make a public statement that aligned with Chinese government positions or dismissed criticism of Chinese policies. International and Hong Kong media would cover the statement critically. There would be backlash on social media, calls for boycotts, protests. Jackie would either double down, clarify that he was misunderstood, or simply stay silent and let the controversy fade. Then months or years later, the pattern would repeat with another controversial statement. What made these controversies particularly painful for Jackie's international fans was the disconnect between his public political statements and the values his films seemed to represent. Jackie's movies were about individuals overcoming oppression, about ordinary people standing up to bullies and corrupt authorities, about persistence and integrity in the face of overwhelming odds. His characters fought against systems that were unjust, refused to accept abuse, used creativity and determination to defeat more powerful opponents. These were stories about individual agency and resistance to authority, themes that seemed completely at odds with Jackie's public statements, defending authoritarian control and dismissing calls for freedom. This disconnect wasn't lost on Jackie's critics, who pointed out the hypocrisy of making millions from films about fighting oppression while publicly defending oppressive government policies. Jackie's response to these criticisms has generally been to separate his entertainment work from his political views, to argue that his films are just entertainment and shouldn't be read as political statements. But that separation is difficult to maintain when the films themselves are so clearly about individuals confronting unjust authority, and when Jackie's real-life political statements seem to side with that authority against the individuals. The situation became even more complicated during the 2014 Hong Kong protests, known as the Umbrella Movement, when tens of thousands of Hong Kong residents took to the streets demanding democratic reforms and opposing mainland Chinese interference in Hong Kong's political system. The protests were largely peaceful, led by students and young people, and they captured international attention as a test of whether Hong Kong could maintain its political freedoms after the 1997 handover to China. Jackie's response to these protests was to publicly criticize them, calling the protesters troublemakers, suggesting they were being manipulated by foreign forces, and arguing they should respect authority rather than disrupting society. This response created enormous backlash in Hong Kong. Protesters created memes mocking Jackie, organized boycotts of his films, vandalized his star on Hong Kong's Avenue of Stars. The anger wasn't just about his specific statements, it was about the perception that Jackie, someone who'd built his success in Hong Kong and benefited from Hong Kong's freedoms, was now siding with mainland authorities against Hong Kong, people fighting to preserve those freedoms. It felt like betrayal, like Jackie had chosen money and mainland approval over loyalty to the place that had made him who he was. Jackie's defenders, particularly in mainland China, argued that his position was being misrepresented, that he wasn't defending authoritarianism, but rather calling for stability and order, that his concerns about protests were practical rather than ideological. They pointed out that Jackie had donated millions to charitable causes in China, had built schools and hospitals, had contributed to disaster relief efforts, and that his commitment to helping ordinary Chinese people was genuine and shouldn't be overshadowed by political controversies. They also noted that Jackie's comments were often taken out of context or mistranslated, that he wasn't a politician or sophisticated political thinker, and that expecting him to have nuanced positions on complex political issues was unrealistic. There's some validity to these defenses. Jackie's charitable work in China is extensive and real. He has built schools in poor rural areas, funded medical facilities, supported disaster relief after earthquakes and floods, contributed to programs supporting children and elderly people. This work has directly helped hundreds of thousands of people and represents a genuine commitment to using his wealth for social good. It's also true that Jackie's comments are sometimes awkwardly phrased or poorly translated, that he's not a trained political spokesperson, and that he occasionally says things that don't convey his intended meaning clearly. But these defenses can't fully explain away the pattern of Jackie's political statements over the past 15 years. It's not just one or two awkward comments taken out of context. It's a consistent record of publicly supporting Chinese government positions, dismissing criticism of government policies, questioning the motives of protesters and democracy advocates, and aligning himself with authoritarian positions on issues of freedom and human rights. This pattern suggests not miscommunication, but a genuine political perspective that is genuinely at odds with liberal democratic values. The question of why Jackie holds these views is complex and probably has multiple answers. Part of it may be generational and cultural. Jackie is now 70 years old, came of age in a very different era, was shaped by experiences and values that are different from younger generations. His parents were refugees from political upheaval, people who'd seen the chaos and violence of civil war and valued stability above almost everything else. Jackie grew up hearing stories about the dangers of political instability, about how disorder and conflict destroyed lives. It's not surprising that someone with that family history might prioritize order and stability over individual freedom, might view protests and political agitation with suspicion rather than sympathy. There's also a practical, commercial explanation. Jackie's business interests are heavily invested in mainland China. He makes films for the Chinese market, has business ventures in China, relies on Chinese government approval for access to the world's largest film market. Speaking out against Chinese government policies or supporting democracy movements would jeopardize those commercial interests, could result in his films being banned in China, could cost him hundreds of millions of dollars. From a purely business perspective, aligning with Chinese government positions is the rational choice, the one that protects his financial interests and maintains his access to the mainland market. But there's probably also a genuine ideological component. Jackie has said repeatedly in various interviews and contexts that he believes Chinese people are not ready for democracy, that Chinese culture and society require strong government control, that Western-style freedom would lead to chaos in China. These aren't just throwaway comments or mistranslations. They represent a consistent worldview that is paternalistic and authoritarian, that assumes ordinary people can't be trusted to govern themselves and need to be controlled by a strong state. Whether this worldview comes from genuine belief or is a rationalization for commercial decisions is difficult to determine from outside Jackie's own mind. What's undeniable is the cost this political positioning has had on Jackie's reputation, particularly outside mainland China. In Hong Kong, where he was once celebrated as a local hero who'd achieved international success, he's now viewed by many as a sellout, a collaborator with mainland authorities, someone who chose money over principles. Young Hong Kong residents in particular have little patience for Jackie's political statements and view him as representing an older generation that's willing to compromise Hong Kong's freedoms for economic benefit. The 2019 Hong Kong protests, which were even larger and more intense than the 2014 umbrella movement, reinforced this divide. Jackie again sided with authorities, criticized protesters, and further alienated himself from Hong Kong youth. In Taiwan, which maintains a complicated relationship with mainland China, and where issues of sovereignty and independence are deeply contested, Jackie's alignment with mainland positions has made him a controversial figure. His films still play in Taiwan, and he has fans there, but his political statements have created significant opposition. When Jackie visits Taiwan for promotional events, protests are common, with activists criticizing his support for Chinese government positions on Taiwan's status and his dismissal of Taiwanese democratic values. In the West, Jackie's political statements have received less attention than they have in Asia, partly because Western media covers Chinese political issues less extensively, and partly because Western audiences are less directly affected by these controversies. But among people who follow Chinese politics or who care about human rights issues, Jackie's reputation has been damaged. He's no longer seen as just a charming action star, but as someone who actively supports an authoritarian government, dismisses legitimate calls for freedom and democracy, and uses his platform to defend policies that suppress human rights. The contrast between Jackie's image in mainland China and his image everywhere else is stark. In mainland China, he remains extremely popular, viewed as a patriotic Chinese who supports his country, contributes to charitable causes, and serves as a cultural ambassador. His political statements that generate controversy elsewhere are seen in China as reasonable, as defending Chinese sovereignty against Western interference, as supporting stability over chaos. The Chinese government actively promotes Jackie, features him in state media, uses him as an example of a successful Chinese person who maintains proper values and loyalty to the country. This creates a situation where Jackie is essentially two different public figures depending on where you are. In mainland China, he's Jackie Chan, the beloved entertainer and patriotic Chinese representative. In Hong Kong, he's Jackie Chan, the sellout who betrayed his birthplace for mainland approval. In the West, he's Jackie Chan, the action star with troubling political views. These different versions of Jackie can't be reconciled because they're based on fundamentally different political values and different understandings of what Jackie's role and responsibility should be. Jackie himself seems to struggle with this situation. In interviews, he's sometimes defensive about political controversies, insisting he's been misunderstood or unfairly criticized. Other times, he seems resigned, acknowledging that his political views make some people angry, but suggesting that's their problem, not his. Occasionally, he expresses frustration that people can't separate his entertainment work from his political statements, that his films should be judged on their own merits regardless of his personal views. But he's never backed down from his political positions, never apologized for supporting Chinese government policies, never acknowledged that his statements might have been wrong or harmful. There's a particular irony in Jackie's situation, given his father's history. Jackie's father fled mainland China because he'd worked for the nationalist government and feared persecution from the communist authorities. He lived for decades under a false identity, hiding his past, protecting his family from potential retaliation. Jackie's father understood directly and personally what it meant to live under authoritarian control, what it meant to be targeted by a government for political reasons. Yet Jackie, who grew up hearing these stories, who knows his own family history of persecution by the communist government, publicly supports that same government and dismisses concerns about authoritarian control. Whether this represents forgiveness, forgetting, or some more complex psychological process is difficult to say. Jackie's relationship with his son JC adds another layer of complication to his political image. When JC was arrested for marijuana possession in 2014, Jackie made public statements accepting partial responsibility and expressing shame. But he also allowed his son to go to prison without using his wealth or connections to intervene, letting JC face full legal consequences. This was presented as tough love, as teaching his son responsibility, but it also happened in the context of Chinese government campaigns against drug use and celebrity behavior. Jackie's public handling of JC's arrest aligned perfectly with government messaging about drug enforcement and parental responsibility. Whether this was genuine parenting philosophy or performance for political benefit is ambiguous. The situation reached perhaps its most symbolic moment in 2021 when Jackie was featured prominently in Chinese state media celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. He appeared in propaganda videos praising the party's achievements, attended official celebrations, made statements about the party's importance to China's development. For mainland Chinese audiences, this was entirely normal. Successful people expressing support for the government on important occasions. For Hong Kong and international observers critical of the Chinese government, it was Jackie fully embracing his role as a government spokesman, using his celebrity to support and legitimize authoritarian rule. What makes Jackie's political positioning particularly complicated is that it's not obviously insincere. He could be doing the minimum necessary to maintain access to the Chinese market while privately holding different views. Some celebrities in his position do exactly that, make required public statements, attend necessary events, but maintain some distance and avoid going beyond what's absolutely required. Jackie doesn't do that. He seems genuinely committed to the positions he expresses, goes beyond what would be minimally required, actively defends Chinese government policies, even when doing so creates controversy and backlash. This raises uncomfortable questions about separating art from artist, about whether we can enjoy Jackie's films while disagreeing with his politics, about what responsibilities celebrities have when they take political positions. These aren't new questions. They come up with any artist or entertainer whose personal views or behavior conflicts with their public work. But they're particularly acute with Jackie because the disconnect is so large between his film persona and his political statements, because his political positions involve defending authoritarianism rather than just holding conservative or unpopular views. Some fans have decided they can't separate the two, that Jackie's political statements have poisoned their ability to enjoy his films, that watching his movies now feels like supporting someone who actively works against freedom and democracy. Other fans maintain that Jackie's entertainment work should be judged independently, that his films brought joy to millions of people, and that value isn't erased by his political view, however troubling. There's no objective right answer to this question. It's a personal decision each person has to make about what they're comfortable with and what matters most to them. What can be said objectively is that Jackie's political positioning has cost him something significant: the universal respect and affection he once enjoyed. In the 1990s and early 2000s, before his political statements became prominent, Jackie was one of the most universally liked figures in global entertainment. People across different countries, cultures, and political backgrounds enjoyed his films and respected his work ethic and dedication. He represented something genuinely positive: hard work, authenticity, persistence, the willingness to put yourself on the line for your craft. That universal affection is gone now, replaced by a divided response where mainland Chinese audiences love him, Hong Kong and Taiwanese audiences are hostile or conflicted, and international audiences are increasingly aware of the political baggage. Jackie is wealthy enough and successful enough that this division probably doesn't affect him materially. He still makes films, still earns money, still has a comfortable life. But it has to affect him personally, has to create some discomfort knowing that millions of people who once admired him now view him negatively, that his birthplace of Hong Kong has largely turned against him, that his legacy is complicated by politics in ways it didn't have to be. Whether Jackie regrets this or sees it as an acceptable cost for maintaining his principles and commercial interests is something only he knows. The future of Jackie's public image in China and globally depends partly on political developments beyond his control. If China continues on its current path, becoming more authoritarian and more aggressive in asserting control over Hong Kong and Taiwan, Jackie's alignment with Chinese government positions will become increasingly controversial internationally. If political conditions change in ways that create more space for criticism or dissent in China, Jackie's past statements might come to be seen as opportunistic rather than principled. If Hong Kong's political situation deteriorates further, with more suppression of freedoms and more mainland control, Jackie's criticism of Hong Kong protesters will look even worse in retrospect. What seems unlikely is that Jackie will change his political positioning significantly. He's 70 years old, has held these positions consistently for 15 years, has too much invested commercially and politically in mainland China to shift course now. His CPPCC position, his business interests, his relationships with Chinese authorities, all of these create strong incentives to maintain his current alignment. And if his political views are genuine rather than purely strategic, there's no reason to expect them to change just because they generate controversy. The tragedy, if that's the right word, is that Jackie's political positioning was probably unnecessary for maintaining commercial success in China. Other Hong Kong and international stars have managed to work in the Chinese market without becoming prominent political spokespeople for the government, without making statements that alienate audiences elsewhere. They navigate Chinese censorship and work with Chinese authorities when necessary, but they maintain enough distance to avoid becoming identified as government representatives. Jackie could have done the same, could have stayed largely silent on political issues, could have declined the CPPCC position, could have maintained friendly but non-committal relationships with Chinese authorities while not actively defending authoritarian policies. That he didn't choose that path, that he actively and repeatedly made political statements that damaged his international reputation, suggests something about Jackie's personality and values. He's never been someone who does things halfway or maintains strategic ambiguity. Throughout his career, he's been direct, committed, willing to take clear positions, even when they're controversial or costly. That quality served him well in his film work, where his refusal to compromise on doing his own stunts became his signature and his legacy. But that same quality, applied to politics, has created a situation where he's damaged his own reputation and complicated his legacy in ways that can't be undone. Jackie Chan will be remembered as one of the greatest action stars in cinema history, as someone who revolutionized how action sequences were filmed and performed, as a creator of joy and entertainment for billions of people worldwide. That legacy is secure, but he'll also be remembered for his political statements, for his support of authoritarianism, for his dismissal of democracy movements, for choosing mainland approval over Hong Kong loyalty. That part of his legacy is also now secure, written in years of public statements that can't be erased or explained away. The question for future generations will be how to hold both of these legacies together. The filmmaker who showed us what dedication and authenticity look like, and the public figure who used his platform to defend the suppression of the very freedoms that made his career possible. That's the complication Jackie created for himself, the cost of his political choices, and the burden his legacy will carry long after he's gone.